"Daddy, why does that boy have the same birthmark as me?" Annie Whitmore's voice nearly disappeared beneath the joyful noise filling the pediatric wing of St. Matthew's Children's Hospital. William Whitmore did not answer right away. He stood in the center of the ward beneath strings of paper snowflakes and silver garland, handing out wrapped presents to a long line of children while cameras flashed around him. Nurses and Santa hats moved between families. Volunteers carried trays of hot cocoa and cookies. Parents crowded close, urging their children forward for pictures with the billionaire whose foundation funded half the hospital's pediatric programs. "Mr. Whitmore, my daughter's next. Can we get one more photo? My son wants the dinosaur, please." The room buzzed with voices and laughter. Beside him, Annie tugged urgently on his sleeve. "Daddy." William handed a toy truck to a grinning little boy without looking down. "One moment, sweetheart." "But Daddy, wait just a second." Annie huffed, then pointed insistently toward the back of the line. "No, look now." William finally glanced down, noticing the seriousness in her face. Annie was not pouting or whining. She looked genuinely unsettled. He bent slightly. "What is it?" She pointed again. "That little boy over there has a birthmark exactly like mine." William blinked. The comment was strange enough to break through his concentration. "Does he now?" he asked, amused but curious. "Yes, on his wrist." William followed the direction of her finger but could not see clearly through the crowd. He straightened and handed the stack of remaining presents to one of the volunteers. "Take over for a moment." The young volunteer nodded quickly. "Of course, Mr. Whitmore." William took Annie's hand. "Show me." Annie immediately brightened and pulled him through the crowd toward the back of the waiting line. "There," she whispered. "Blue sweater." William saw him then. A small boy no older than 4 stood near the window beside a tired ill-looking woman in a worn brown coat. He was on his toes, craning his neck eagerly to see how close he was to the front of the gift line. In his excitement, he had rolled both sleeves of his sweater halfway up his arms. William's eyes dropped instinctively to the child's left wrist. He couldn't see the mark clearly from here. The boy noticed them approaching and instantly shrank closer to his mother's side, his small shoulders tightening. He looked up at William with the wary, uncertain expression children wore when confronted by very powerful strangers they did not understand. Annie smiled first. "Hi," she said brightly. The boy blinked at her. "Hi." Annie pointed at his arm with the blunt honesty only children possessed. "You have a birthmark like me." The boy looked down confused. "I do." Annie thrust out her own wrist proudly. "See, mine looks just like yours." His eyes widened. William crouched slowly to make himself less imposing. His voice was gentle, careful. "Son, would you mind showing me your wrist for a moment?" The boy looked uncertain and glanced up at his mother. She stiffened immediately. "It's just a birthmark," she said too quickly. William held her gaze for half a beat, then looked back at the child. "That may be," he said softly. "But would you show me anyway?" The little boy hesitated, then slowly lifted his arm. William looked and died a little where he knelt. There, on the inside of the child's wrist, was a pale crescent-shaped birthmark, perfectly identical to Annie's. William stopped breathing. For one suspended moment, the noise of the hospital disappeared. He stared at that tiny crescent mark as if the world itself had cracked open. Impossible, because that mark was not random. It was Whitmore blood, a hereditary mark passed through the men of his family for generations. A strange unmistakable trait borne by his grandfather, then his father, then William himself beneath the cuff of his watch. And once years ago, his younger brother had worn the same mark. "Daddy," Annie whispered. William did not answer. He stared at the child's wrist while something cold and ancient opened in his chest. His mind raced, refusing what his eyes were telling him. "Daddy, you see it now, right?" Annie asked softly. William swallowed hard. "Yes," he said at last. The word came out rough. Annie frowned. "Why do you look scared?" William forced himself to breathe. He rose slowly, every movement measured, controlled. Only years of discipline kept his voice calm. "What's your name, son?" The little boy shifted nervously. Eli, a good name, William nodded once. And how old are you, Eli? Fool, younger than Annie. William's eyes moved to the woman beside him. She stood rigid now, one hand protectively on the boy's shoulder. What's your name? She hesitated, then answered carefully. Rachel Carter. William repeated it silently. Rachel Carter. Beside him, Annie stepped closer to Eli and held her wrist next to his with childlike delight. We really match, she whispered. Eli stared at the two marks side by side and gave a slow, astonished nod. We do. William looked down at the children, then at their wrists, then back to Rachel. All warmth drained from his face. Because William Whitmore stood in the middle of a crowded children's hospital staring at a little boy carrying his family's blood on his skin. William Whitmore did not move for several seconds after seeing the mark on the boy's wrist beside him. Annie held up her own wrist with bright-eyed wonder. See, we really do match. The little boy stared at her mark, his mouth parting in amazement. Mine looks just like yours, Annie beamed. I told Daddy that. William forced himself to breathe. The woman standing behind the boy had gone rigid. Her fingers rested on the child's shoulder with the subtle tension of someone ready to pull him away at the first sign of danger. William straightened slowly, every inch of his posture calm despite the storm inside him. Miss Carter, he said evenly, would you and your son come with me to the waiting area for a moment? I'd like to ask you a few questions about that birthmark. Her answer came immediately. No. The refusal was sharp enough to make Annie blink. William kept his voice measured. I'm not trying to alarm you, I said. No. The boy looked up between them, confused by the sudden tension. Annie stepped closer to him and smiled, trying to fix what adults had complicated. I'm Annie, by the way. The little boy looked at her shyly. That's a cool name, he nodded solemnly. Thank you. William's gaze never left Rachel Carter. Miss Carter, he said quietly. Please, if I'm wrong, then this conversation ends in 5 minutes and you walk away. But if I'm not, he let the sentence hang. Then this matters more than you understand. Something in his tone reached her. Rachel hesitated, then slowly nodded once. All right, 5 minutes. William exhaled softly. Thank you. He led them to a quieter waiting area near the far end of the floor, away from the cameras and holiday crowd. It was a small alcove lined with pale blue chairs beneath a row of windows overlooking the snowy Chicago streets below. Annie climbed into the seat beside Eli immediately, already talking to him as if they had known each other for weeks. My daddy has a giant Christmas tree at our house, she informed him proudly. Eli's eyes widened. How giant? Like taller than the upstairs. He gasped. No way. William sat across from Rachel. Now that they were alone, the fear in her face no longer had anywhere to hide. He kept his voice low and gentle. Tell me the truth. Where did your son get that birthmark? Rachel looked down at her clasped hands. For several long seconds, she said nothing. Then quietly from his father, William's chest tightened. His voice dropped almost to a whisper. Who was his father? Rachel looked up. Daniel Whitmore, she said. The name hit him like a blow. William's S had frozen. Across from him, Annie and Eli continued chatting about Christmas cookies, oblivious. William's voice came out rough. Say that again. Rachel swallowed hard. Eli's father was Daniel Whitmore. For one suspended moment, William could not speak. He simply stared at her. Then finally, how do you know that name? Rachel gave a hollow laugh. Because I loved him. William leaned back slowly in his chair as pieces of the past shifted violently in his mind. Now he saw it fully. He stared at Eli again. It was Daniel's face in miniature. William's throat tightened. When? He asked quietly. When did you know him? Rachel looked toward Eli before answering. 7 years ago. We met when I was working nights at a diner near Joliet. He came in every Thursday for coffee and pie and tipped too much because he thought I worked too hard. A faint broken smile touched her lips. He told me his family had money but didn't want anything to do with him anymore. William closed his eyes briefly. That sounded exactly like Daniel. Rachel continued, voice soft with memory. He said he'd chosen the wrong woman by his family's standards. Said they thought I wasn't good enough, that I came from the wrong neighborhood, wrong family, wrong everything. Her smile vanished, but Daniel didn't care. William's jaw tightened. Of course, their father had always cared more about pedigree than happiness. Ananiel left home for you? William asked. Rachel nodded. He walked away from everything. Annie, half listening now, looked up and frowned. Wait, Eli's daddy had the same last name as us. William looked at her. Rachel looked stricken. Annie blinked between the adults. Did Eli's daddy know you, Daddy? William's voice was gentle. He was my brother, sweetheart. Annie's eyes widened. That means William nodded slowly. That means Eli may be your cousin. Annie gasped as if she had just been handed the greatest gift of her life. I have a cousin. Eli stared at her, stunned. What's a cousin? It's like family, but not your brother, Annie explained helpfully. That sounds cool. Rachel covered her mouth with trembling fingers. William forced himself to focus. Tell me everything, he said. Rachel looked down, gathering herself. Daniel and I lived together for almost a year. We were broke but happy. Then I found out I was pregnant. Her voice cracked. He cried when I told him. Actually cried. She wiped quickly at one eye. He said he wanted to come back here. Wanted to make peace with your family before Eli was born. He said his brother would understand if anyone would. William felt those words like a knife. He said that. Rachel nodded. He loved you. You know, even after everything, William had to look away. Rachel continued quietly. But before he could come back, her voice faltered. He got sick. It happened fast. Faster than anyone expected. William turned sharply. Sick. Rachel nodded, tears filling her eyes now. Very sick. By the time we found out what it was, there wasn't much they could do. Daniel died before Eli was born. The words hollowed the air from William's lungs. Not the story the family had been told. He stared at her. That's not what I heard. Rachel gave a bitter, exhausted laugh. Then someone lied to you. The blood in William's veins turned to ice. He thought of the vague phone call years ago. The rushed explanation. The family lawyers who handled everything before he could ask questions. His father. His father had hidden this. William's hands curled into planks, fists. Rachel watched him carefully. I never told anyone after he died. Daniel said, your family would never accept me. Never accept our son. I believed him. You should have told me, William said, though the words lacked anger. Her eyes flashed. Why? So your rich, powerful family could take my baby. Because you share his blood. She leaned forward, voice shaking. Do you know what it's like to raise a child alone while everyone tells you you're not enough? To choose between rent and medication. To watch your son get sick and pray he survives another year. Tears burned down her cheeks now. I had one thing left that was mine, Mr. Whitmore. One thing Daniel gave me. I wasn't risking losing him. William said nothing. Beside them, Annie took Eli's hand with complete certainty. Well, she announced, if you're my cousin, you can come over and see the giant Christmas tree. Eli looked at Rachel. Can I? Rachel laughed through tears. William stared at the children, at Daniel's son sitting beside his daughter, at the impossible reality before him. His brother had died believing his family cast him out. A woman had raised his child alone in fear, and a little boy carrying Whitmore blood had spent 4 years growing up without anyone in his father's family knowing he existed. William swallowed hard, then looked Rachel Carter in the eye. You have my word, he said quietly. No one is taking him from you. Rachel studied him. William's voice lowered further. I failed my brother once. I won't fail his son. If this moment moved you, let me know in the comments where you're watching from. Don't forget to like this video, subscribe to the channel, and join us for more powerful stories about justice, family, and second chances. And as Annie laughed beside Eli, already planning their future friendship with the confidence only children possessed, William Whitmore did not sleep that night. Long after Annie had been tucked into bed in the vast halls of Whitmore Manor had fallen quiet. He remained alone in his study, with the lights dimmed and the city glowing beyond the windows. A crystal tumbler of whiskey sat untouched on the desk beside him. In his hands rested an old framed photograph he had not looked at in years. Daniel Whitmore smiled out from the image with the careless confidence of a younger son who still believed life would bend to his will. One arm hung over William's shoulder, both of them tanned from some long-forgotten summer on Lake Michigan, both grinning as if the future belonged to them. William stared at his brother's face until his eyes blurred. Then he looked away. He had spent years convincing himself that grief became manageable if one stayed busy enough, if one worked long enough, bought enough buildings, signed enough contracts, attended enough charity galas. Eventually, the ache dulled into something respectable and quiet. He now understood that it had been a lie because tonight grief was no longer a memory. It had a face, a small face with solemn brown eyes and a crescent mark on its wrist. Daniel's son. The word still felt unreal. A soft knock came at the door. "Come in, Mrs. Campbell entered carrying a silver tray with fresh coffee and a plate of untouched shortbread from the kitchen. One look at him and her expression softened. "You haven't moved in 2 hours." William sat down the photograph. "I'm not hungry. I wasn't asking about the cookies." She crossed the room and placed the tray on the desk. Then her eyes fell to Daniel's photograph. "You loved him very much," she said quietly. William gave a humorless laugh. "I spent half my life arguing with him." "That's not what I said." He leaned back in his chair, exhaustion showing through the cracks of his composure. He was infuriating, reckless, stubborn. Thought every rule in the world existed, solely to challenge him. "Mrs. Campbell smiled faintly. "Sounds familiar." William ignored that. His gaze drifted back to the photograph. He was also the only person in this family who ever said exactly what he meant. No politics, no performance, no pretending. His voice lowered. "He deserved better than what we gave him." Mrs. Campbell remained silent because there was nothing to argue with. William's father had run the Whitmore family like a kingdom, and kingdoms did not tolerate disobedience. When Daniel refused to leave Rachel Carter, the punishment had been swift and brutal. His trust frozen, his cards canceled, his name erased from family business and social circles alike. William had objected in private, but not enough. Never enough. He had told himself there would be time to fix things later. There always seemed to be time until there wasn't. A buzz came from William's phone. He grabbed it instantly. "Frank Donovan." William answered at once. "Talk to me." Frank's voice came low and steady through the speaker. "I've got preliminary findings." William straightened in his chair. "Go." "Rachel Carter's clean. No criminal history, no drugs, no fraud. Works 2 jobs, waitressing evenings, bookkeeping mornings for a small plumbing company. Lives in a 1-bedroom apartment on the South Side." William's jaw tightened. "And Eli, medical records match what she told you. Heart condition diagnosed it, too. Needs ongoing treatment. She's behind on bills." William closed his eyes briefly. "Anything else?" Frank hesitated. "There's more on Daniel." William's eyes opened immediately. "What about him, boss? The official story your family was given doesn't line up." Ice slid through William's veins. "Explain." "There was no accident report matching Daniel Whitmore around the date of death your father's office recorded." Frank paused. "No police file, no coroner's public report, no hospital emergency record under that cause of death." William stood slowly. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying whatever story your family got wasn't the whole truth." William's grip tightened around the phone. Frank continued carefully. "I found private hospice records. Daniel was admitted under an alias 6 years ago. Late-stage leukemia." William stopped breathing. "Leukemia." He turned slowly toward the darkened window, the city lights blurring. Rachel had told the truth. Daniel had not died suddenly. He had wasted away slowly and no one had told him. Frank's voice softened. "Boss." William swallowed hard. "Keep talking." Hospice staff records note Rachel Carter remained with him until the end. She was 7 months pregnant when he died. William pressed his hand flat against the desk. He could suddenly see it too clearly. Daniel dying in some quiet room under false paperwork while Rachel sat beside him carrying his unborn child. No family, no brother, no one from home because someone had made certain they never knew. Frank spoke again. There's more. Financial records show your father's private attorney handled all arrangements. Quiet burial, closed records, no public obituary. William's expression went cold. His father even dead, the old man still knew how to wound. He buried the truth with him. William said quietly. Frank did not answer. He didn't need to. William ended the call and stood motionless in the silence that followed. Mrs. Campbell looked at him carefully. What happened? He turned toward her, face pale with fury. My father lied. Her brow furrowed. He told us Daniel died suddenly in an accident. William's voice sharpened with every word. He didn't. Daniel had leukemia. He was dying for months, maybe longer. My father knew and never told me. Mrs. Campbell stared in disbelief. Why would he do that? William laughed bitterly. Because Daniel chose the wrong woman. Because he embarrassed the family. Because in my father's world, disobedience deserved exile. His eyes darkened. Apparently, even in death, the room fell silent. William looked down at Daniel's photograph. And for the first time in years, the grief inside him twisted into anger. No doubt Daniel, not at Rachel, at himself, because he had accepted the lie too easily, because part of him had believed Daniel truly wanted no contact because he had let pride silence him when he should have gone after his brother. He sank slowly into the chair again. He was dying, he whispered. And I didn't know, Mrs. Campbell's voice gentled. You couldn't have known. I should have. His voice cracked. He was my brother. He stared at the photograph with hollow eyes. All that time I thought he chose to stay away. He swallowed hard, but he was trying to survive, trying to build a family, trying to come home. His voice dropped to almost nothing, and I never came for him. The truth of that sat between them like a stone, upstairs somewhere in the quiet house. Annie laughed in her sleep through a half-open nursery monitor. The sound broke something in him because Daniel should have had that. Daniel should have had nights listening to his son laugh from another room. Daniel should have lived to teach Eli how to ride a bike, throw a baseball, tie a necktie badly before prom. Instead, a little boy with Whitmore blood was growing up in a cramped apartment with a sick heart. While the family who should have loved him never knew he existed. William stood abruptly. Mrs. Campbell blinked. Where are you going? To fix what my family broke. Tonight. William was already reaching for his coat. Yes, tonight. 25 minutes later. His black Escalade rolled through the south side beneath street lights that painted the winter roads gold. Frank had sent the address ahead. The building was older than it should have been for human habitation. Brick stained by age. Paint peeling near the stairwell, one flickering exterior light over the entrance. William stood outside for a moment, staring up at it. Daniel's son lived here. His nephew, a Whitmore by blood, sleeping beneath a leaking roof in a neighborhood his family would never have driven through voluntarily. The shame of that nearly choked him. He climbed the stairs and knocked. Inside, he heard movement. Then Rachel opened the door. Shock crossed her face instantly. Mr. Whitmore. William stood there in his dark coat, winter wind at his back, eyes carrying more weight than before. We need to talk. Rachel hesitated, then stepped aside. The apartment was painfully modest. Worn couch, tiny kitchen, space heater humming near the wall, toys stacked neatly in one corner beside children's books with taped spines. Eli was asleep on the couch beneath a blanket, one stuffed dinosaur tucked beneath his chin. William stared at him. Daniel's son, so small, so unaware of the war of regret and guilt raging inside the man watching him. Rachel closed the door softly. What happened? William turned to her, and for the first time in years, his voice carried no billionaire polish, no corporate precision, only raw human pain. My father knew Daniel was dying, he said. And he kept it from me. Rachel's face changed. The anger she carried softened just slightly. William's eyes moved to Eli again. He died believing his family abandoned him. Rachel whispered. He never stopped hoping someone would come. The words cut deep. William swallowed hard. Then he looked at her with quiet certainty. I can't change what happened to Daniel. His voice was rough. But I can change what happens next. Rachel's breath caught. William stepped closer, lowering his voice so as not to wake the sleeping boy. I meant what I said today. No one is taking him from you. His gaze flicked to Eli. But that child is my family, my brother's son. He looked back at her, and whether you like me or not, I'm not walking away from him again. Rachel stared at him in silence. Then slowly, very slowly, she nodded, and in the dim light of that tiny apartment, beside the sleeping son of the brother he had failed, William Whitmore silently made himself a promise. Whatever it took, he would not lose Daniel's child, too. Rachel Carter did not trust easily. William saw that within minutes of stepping into her apartment. She offered him the only chair not buried beneath folded laundry or children's coloring books, then remained standing herself, arms folded tightly across her chest as if sitting down might somehow surrender too much ground. The little space heater hummed in the corner. Outside, winter wind rattled faintly against the old windows. Eli still slept on the couch, his small chest rising and falling beneath the dinosaur blanket, oblivious to the adult standing over the shape of his future. William lowered himself into the chair slowly, taking in the room with the quiet attention of a man cataloging every detail. The apartment was clean despite its age and poverty. There were no empty bottles, no chaos, no signs of neglect, just wear. The wear of people surviving one hard month at a time. Rachel noticed him looking. If you're wondering whether I'm a bad mother because I'm poor, she said coldly. Save it. William met her gaze. I'm wondering how you've managed to do all of this alone. That answer caught her off guard. Her folded arms loosened slightly. Barely, she admitted after a moment. William looked toward Eli again. How bad is his condition? Rachel's face tightened instantly. Fear and exhaustion settled over her features with practiced familiarity. The doctors say he needs monitoring constantly. Medication every day. Maybe surgery someday if it gets worse. She swallowed. They don't know yet. And the bills. A humorless laugh escaped her. You saw where we live. What do you think? William did not respond immediately because he already knew. He had seen enough financial reports over the years to recognize desperation when it wore a human face. Rachel continued, her voice lower now, stripped of pride by fatigue. Insurance covers some, not enough. There are always things they don't cover. New prescriptions, tests, specialist visits, school absences, missed shifts. She shook her head. Everything costs money when your kid gets sick. William's jaw tightened. Daniel's son should never have lived like this. He should have had the best doctors in Chicago before the first symptom appeared. The best schools, the safest home, every chance and advantage money could buy. Instead, he had a failing heart in a drafty apartment because the Witters had let pride destroy their own blood. Rachel studied William carefully. Why are you really here? He looked at her. Because my brother died thinking his family abandoned him. His voice remained low, controlled. But the grief beneath it was unmistakable. And because I need to know everything I should have known years ago. Rachel hesitated. Then she moved to the small kitchen counter, bracing one hand against it as though steadying herself. He loved you, you know, she said quietly. William looked up sharply. Rachel gave a sad smile. Daniel talked about you all the time. Said you were the only one in that whole family who ever tried to understand him. William stared at her. He said that. He said if anyone would forgive him eventually it would be you. She paused. He wanted to come back. The words hit like a punch. William swallowed hard. Then why didn't he? Rachel looked toward Eli before answering because by the time he got sick, he was ashamed. William frowned. Rachel's voice softened with memory. He hated what we had become. We were struggling. He was working jobs he'd never imagined doing, trying to keep us afloat, pretending it didn't bother him. She gave a faint, broken laugh. He'd come home exhausted and joke that at least rich people coffee tasted the same as poor people coffee. Her smile faded. Then he got diagnosed. William said nothing. Rachel continued, eyes glistening now. He kept saying he'd call you after treatment started. Then after the next round. Then after he looked healthier. Then after he wasn't so weak. She looked down. Eventually, there wasn't time left. The room seemed to shrink around William. He could picture it too clearly. Daniel delaying, waiting for the right moment. Too proud to return broken. Too hopeful to believe the end would come first. How long was he sick? William asked quietly. Almost a year. A year. His brother had been dying for a year. William's hand tightened on the armrest and not one person told me. Rachel's eyes flashed. Would it have mattered if they had? Hammett had a gas. Yes. The force of that single word silenced her. William leaned forward slightly. I would have gone to him. Rachel searched his face and whatever she saw there made her believe him. After a long pause, she nodded once. I know. Silence stretched between them. Then from the couch came a small, sleepy voice. Mommy. Both adults turned. Eli sat up slowly, rubbing his eyes with one fist, his hair sticking up in every direction. He blinked blurrily at William and frowned in confusion. You're still here. William managed the first real smile of the night. Looks that way. Eli looked from him to his mother. Am I in trouble? Rachel crossed immediately to kneel beside him. No, baby. Then why is the rich guy in our house? William let out a startled laugh despite everything. Rachel covered her face briefly. Eli, what? He asked innocently. He is rich. William crouched near the couch. That's true enough. Eli narrowed his eyes with childish seriousness. Do you have a helicopter? Rachel whispered horrified. Oh my God. William's mouth twitched. No helicopter. A race car. No race car. A dinosaur skeleton. William considered. Actually, I might know a museum curator with one. Eli's eyes widened. Rachel stared, torn between embarrassment and disbelief. The boy studied William for a long moment, then asked the question that stole the air from the room. Were you really my daddy's brother? William's smile faded. He nodded once. Yes. Eli looked down at his own hands. Mom says my daddy was brave. William swallowed hard. He was. Was he nice? William felt his throat tighten. Yes, he said softly. Very nice. Did he love me? Rachel closed her eyes. William answered without hesitation. More than anything, Eli seemed to think about that. Then he asked quietly. Then why didn't he stay? No question in William's life had ever hurt more. He moved closer until he was eye level with the child. Because sometimes, he said carefully, good people get taken away before they're supposed to. His voice roughened. But if your father had been given the choice, he would have stayed every day of your life. Eli stared at him. Then, in the simple trust only children possessed, he nodded as if accepting this truth into his bones. Okay. Rachel turned away quickly, wiping tears. William remained kneeling there, looking at his brother's son, this little boy with Daniel's eyes and his family's blood and none of the protection he should have had. Something settled inside him then. Not grief, not guilty. He rose slowly. Rachel, she turned. Tomorrow I'm having my family physician review Eli's full medical file. Her face hardened instantly. I didn't ask for charity. This is not charity. Yes, it is. William stepped closer, voice calm but firm. No, charity is what strangers give. This is what family owes. Rachel stared at him. He continued. I'm not trying to replace you. I'm not trying to buy my way into your son's life. But I will not stand by while my nephew lacks anything I can provide. Her lips parted. The word nephew clearly struck harder than she expected. William lowered his voice. Let me help him. Rachel looked at Eli at the peeling walls, the space heater, the unpaid bills on the counter, then finally back at William. Her shoulders sagged, not in defeat, in exhaustion. You really mean to stay in his life, don't you? William did not hesitate for the rest of mine. Rachel's eyes filled again, then slowly, very slowly, she nodded. Okay. The word was barely above a whisper, but it changed everything. Eli looked between them in confusion. What's happening? Rachel managed a watery smile. I think your uncle is going to help us. Eli's eyes widened. I have an uncle. William knelt again. Yes, he said softly. You do. The boy considered that, then smiled. A bright crooked Daniel smile that hit William so hard he nearly lost composure. Cool, Eli said. William laughed quietly, shaking his head. Yes, cool. He stood a few minutes later to leave. Rachel walked him to the door in silence. Before he stepped out, she spoke quietly. There's something else you should know. William turned. Rachel's expression grew grave. Daniel kept writing letters to your family after he got sick. William still. What letters? He wrote to your father, to you, to your mother, begging for peace before he died. Her jaw tightened. No one ever answered. William's blood turned cold. Rachel looked him straight in the eye. He thought none of you cared enough to write back. The words struck like a blade. William stood frozen in the doorway because he had never received a single letter, not one, which meant only one thing. His father had intercepted them, hidden them, buried Daniel's final pleas before they ever reached the family. William's expression darkened into something Rachel had not yet seen from him. Not sorrow, not grief, something harder, something dangerous. Do you still have them? He asked. Rachel nodded once. In a box. I kept everything. William's voice lowered to steel. I want to read everyone. Rachel hesitated, then gave a small nod. Come tomorrow. William stepped into the freezing night air, but barely felt the cold because grief had now become fury. His father had not merely abandoned Daniel. He had made certain Daniel died, believing his family chose not to love him. William descended the cracked apartment stairs with murder in his pulse and one thought burning through his mind. The dead could not be avenged, but the lies buried with them could be destroyed. And by the time he slid into the waiting black Escalade, William Whitmore knew with perfect clarity, this was no longer just about finding his nephew. It was about uncovering every betrayal that had stolen years from his brother's life. William Whitmore arrived at his office before sunrise. The city beyond the floor-to-ceiling windows of Whitmore Tower still wore the blue-gray hush of early morning. The streets below half buried beneath fresh snow and scattered headlights. Most of Chicago had not yet begun its day, but William had been awake for hours. Rachel Carter's words from the night before had followed him home like ghosts. He wrote letters begging for peace. No one answered because no one had ever seen them. His father had stolen that final dignity from Daniel, too. William stood behind his desk in shirt sleeves, staring at the skyline with a fury so cold it no longer felt like anger. It felt like clarity. A knock came at the door. Frank Donovan entered carrying a slim leather folder and one battered cardboard storage box. William turned sharply. Frank set both on the desk. My men were at the apartment before dawn. Rachel gave permission. William's gaze dropped to the box. Letters. Daniel's final words. His throat tightened. Frank studied him carefully. You sure you want to do this before your board meeting? William pulled the lid off the box. Can't the meeting? Frank nodded. Already done. William gave him the faintest look of appreciation before reaching inside. The first envelope was yellowed at the edges. Daniel's handwriting unmistakable across the front. To my brother. William sat down slowly. His hands that had signed billion-dollar acquisitions without trembling, shook as he opened the envelope. Inside was a single folded page. Will, if Rachel ever gives you this, then either I got lucky and found the courage to come home myself or I ran out of time before I could. I don't know which possibility hurts worse. William stopped breathing. He read on. I know I said things I can't take back. I know I walked out angry and proud and convinced I didn't need any of you. Maybe part of me believed that then, but life has a way of humbling a man. Rachel is pregnant. You're going to be an uncle. William closed his eyes. A sharp, involuntary breath escaped him. He forced himself onward. He's a boy. At least that's what the doctor says. I wish you could have seen my face when she told me. I laughed like an idiot for 10 straight minutes. I wanted to call you that night. I should have tell Annie if you ever have a little girl someday that her cousin better be tougher than his old man. William's lips parted slightly. Daniel had written this before Annie was even born. He kept reading. I don't know if Dad will ever forgive me. Maybe he won't. But I'm tired of pretending I don't miss my family. If you're reading this, then maybe there's still time for us. If there is, come find me. The letter ended there. William sat motionless. Frank remained silent across the desk. After a long moment, William reached for the next envelope and the next and the next. Each letter cut deeper than the last. Some were hopeful, some apologetic, some written in pain so obvious it bled through every line. One described Daniel assembling a crib with second-hand tools in a cramped apartment. Another joked bitterly about working construction while rich men screamed into Bluetooth headsets nearby. The final letter had been written in handwriting so shaky William barely recognized it. Will, I think this may be the last one. I'm tired. God, I'm so tired. Rachel says I should rest, but I need to write this while I still can. I wanted to meet my son. I wanted one chance to hold him and tell him his father wasn't always a screw-up. I wanted one chance to shake your hand again before I go. If I never get that, then tell him I loved him before I ever saw his face. Tell him I tried to come home. Tell him I never stopped being your brother, William the Page. Then, for the second time in his adult life, he cried. Not the quiet tears of polite grief, not the contained sorrow of funerals and condolences and black ties. He wept like a man who had discovered too late that his brother died with love in his heart and rejection in his memory. Frank turned his gaze away and gave him the dignity of pretending not to see. After several minutes, William wiped his face roughly and stood. His grief had changed shape now. It had become purpose. He wrote to all of us. William said hoarsely. Frank nodded once. And my father buried every word. Yes. William stared at the letters spread across his desk like evidence in a trial. Then his expression hardened. Get my mother here. Frank blinked. Today. No. William's voice turned to steel. Now, an hour later, Margaret Whitmore entered her son's office wrapped in a cream wool coat and pearls. Every inch the polished widow of old. Chicago money. At 68, she remained beautiful in the cold, immaculate way some women became after decades of perfect posture and perfect restraint. She took one look at William's face and frowned. What is this urgency about? William said nothing. He simply pushed the letters across the desk. She looked down. Her expression changed slowly, visibly. What are those? She whispered. Daniel's final letters. Margaret went pale. William's voice came low and lethal. He wrote us over and over, begging for peace before he died. She stared at the handwriting like it might burn her. Then she sank slowly into the chair opposite him. Oh, God, you knew? William asked. She looked up sharply. No. He studied her and knew instantly she was telling the truth. Tears filled Margaret's eyes. Your father told me Daniel wanted no contact. He said, your brother refused every attempt we made. Her voice cracked. He swore to me Daniel was too proud to come home. William laughed bitterly. Then he lied to both of us. Margaret picked up one letter with trembling hands. As she read, her composure shattered, her shoulders shook. He wanted us, she whispered. All this time, he wanted us. William's jaw clenched. Yes. Margaret covered her mouth and sobbed. For several long minutes, neither spoke. Then finally, she looked up through tears. Why are you showing me this now? William leaned forward. Because Daniel had a son. Her face drained of color. A what? A son, William repeated. 4 years old. His name is Elijah. Margaret stared at him in stunned silence. No, she whispered. No, that can't. William held up his wrist, then placed one of Daniel's old photographs beside it, then slid across the medical intake photo Frank had printed of Eli. Margaret looked from one to the other. Her hand flew to her mouth. Oh my God, he has the family mark, William said. He has Daniel's face, and his mother confirms everything. Margaret began to cry harder. My grandson, she whispered. Your grandson, William corrected quietly. She closed her eyes. William watched her carefully, then asked the question burning inside him. Did father know? Margaret looked shattered. After a long silence, she whispered. I don't know. William's eyes narrowed. You don't know. She shook her head weakly. Near the end, your father became secretive. He handled everything involving Daniel himself. Lawyers, phone calls, funeral arrangements. Tears ran freely now. I thought he was protecting me from more pain. No, William said coldly. He was protecting his pride. Margaret flinched, but she did not deny it. William stood and moved to the window. Daniel died thinking his mother abandoned him. His son grew up fatherless and poor while this family sat in luxury, pretending the past was settled. Behind him, Margaret whispered brokenly, "Can I meet him?" William turned. The question caught him off guard. Her eyes pleaded now, not as matriarch, not as widow, not as a Whitmore. As a grieving mother, "Please," she whispered before it's too late to do one thing right. William studied her, then nodded once. "If Rachel agrees." Margaret sobbed into her hands. William returned to the desk and gathered Daniel's letters carefully. As he placed them back into the box, he understood something with chilling clarity. His father had ruled this family through fear, image, and control. Even in death, the damage remained. But that era was over. Daniel's son existed, and the truth could no longer be buried. William looked toward the skyline, then down at the letters, then at his mother weeping quietly in the chair. And in that moment, he made another silent vow. He would rebuild what his father destroyed or burn the Whitmore legacy to the ground trying. 2 days later, William Whitmore drove back to Rachel Carter's apartment. With his mother in the passenger seat, Margaret Whitmore had insisted on coming herself. She had dressed more simply than usual. No pearls, no furlined coat, no polished performance of old money dignity, just a dark wool coat, gloves folded in trembling hands, and the face of a woman who had not slept since learning her dead son had left behind a child she had never known. As the Escalade turned onto Rachel's block, Margaret stared out the window in silence. "This is where they live?" she asked softly. William nodded. She looked at the weather-worn apartment buildings, the cracked sidewalks patched with old snow, the rusted railings and narrow alleys. Then she whispered more to herself than to him. "My God." William did not answer. He had thought the same thing the first night. They climbed the stairs in silence. When Rachel opened the door and saw Margaret standing beside William, she immediately stiffened. Her expression hardened. "No." William stepped forward at once. "Rachel, please." "No." Her voice sharpened. "You said, no one else." Margaret stepped forward before William could speak. Tears already glistened in her eyes. "My name is Margaret Whitmore," she said softly. "I'm Daniel's mother." Rachel froze. The apartment fell silent from the couch. Eli looked up from a coloring book spread across the cushions. Annie, who had begged to come and was currently coloring beside him, brightened immediately. "Hi, Grandma Margaret," Annie chirped, apparently deciding this was excellent news. No one else moved. Margaret's voice trembled. "Please, I know I have no right to ask this of you, but if that little boy is my grandson." Her chin shook. "Please let me meet him before I die, regretting one more thing." Rachel stared at her. William could see the war inside her, the instinct to protect, the anger she still carried, the fear of opening the door to people whose family had once rejected everything she and Daniel had built. Then Eli looked up at Rachel and whispered, "Is she my grandma?" Rachel closed her eyes and nodded. Something broke open in Margaret Whitmore. She let out a strangled sob and dropped to her knees right there in the doorway, heedless of her coat, her age, her dignity. "Oh, sweetheart." Eli stared at her uncertainly. Margaret covered her mouth, tears streaming openly now. "You look just like him." The little boy blinked. "Like who?" "Your father." Rachel's face crumpled. William looked away briefly, giving all of them the privacy of pretending not to witness grief. Eli stood slowly and approached Margaret with cautious curiosity. "You knew my daddy?" Margaret nodded through tears. "When he was smaller than you, was he nice?" Margaret laughed through her sobbing. "No, he was a menace." Then she smiled shakily. "But he was wonderful, too." That seemed to satisfy Eli. He stepped closer. Margaret reached out with trembling hands, but stopped short, silently, asking permission. Eli looked at Rachel. Rachel nodded once. Then the boy stepped into Margaret's arms. The sound that left her then was not graceful. It was the raw, wounded cry of a mother holding the last living piece of the son she had lost. William stood frozen near the doorway, his own throat tight. Rachel quietly turned away to wipe her face. Annie leaned toward William and whispered loudly, "Everybody's crying again." William bent and whispered back, "That happens sometimes when people love each other very much." She nodded solemnly as if filing this away as important information. Inside the apartment, Margaret eventually pulled back enough to look at Eli properly. "I should have known you existed," she whispered. "I should have found you." Eli, with the blunt kindness of children, patted her arm. "It's okay." That nearly destroyed her. Later, after the children had been bribed into the bedroom with cookies and cartoons, the adults sat in Rachel's tiny living room while snow fell beyond the window. Margaret held Daniel's letters in her lap. Rachel had given her the originals. She clutched them like sacred relics. "I don't know how to apologize for what my husband did," Margaret said quietly, "or for what this family failed to do." She looked at Rachel with wet eyes. "But I am sorry more than I can say." Rachel sat stiffly across from her. "My son grew up asking where his father was," she said. "And I had no answers that made sense to a child." Margaret bowed her head. "I know." Rachel's voice cracked. "Daniel loved your family even after everything. He never stopped hoping someone would forgive him." Margaret broke again at that. William spoke quietly into the silence. "We cannot change what happened, but we can decide what happens now." Rachel looked at him. William met her gaze evenly. "Eli needs stability, medical care, family. He should know who his father was." He paused. "And he should know he was wanted." Rachel swallowed, then asked the question William knew had haunted her since all this began. "What exactly are you offering?" William answered plainly, "Everything he should have had from the start." She frowned. "Meaning private specialists, the best treatment available, a trust in his name." William's voice remained calm. "Matter of fact, educational support, security if needed." He paused. "And if you're willing, a home where neither of you has to struggle like this anymore." Rachel stared at him. Margaret did, too. Even Annie and Eli had gone quiet enough in the next room that William suspected at least one small ear was listening at the door. Rachel's voice was careful. "You want us to move into your house?" William shook his head. "Not unless you choose to. I'm offering options. A guest house, a separate property, whatever gives Eli the best life while keeping you comfortable." Rachel leaned back, overwhelmed. "No one just offers things like that." William's expression hardened slightly. "Families should sans." Margaret spoke softly. "Rachel, whatever you think of us, please believe this much. Daniel would have wanted his son to know his family." Rachel's eyes filled again. "I know." William watched her carefully. "You don't have to answer tonight." Rachel looked around the apartment, at peeling paint, at patched furniture, at the old heater rattling against the wall, then toward the bedroom where Eli laughed at something Annie had apparently declared very funny. When she looked back at William, her voice was smaller than before. "He asks every Christmas if his dad's family is somewhere out there." William's chest tightened. Rachel swallowed hard. "I never knew what to tell him," Margaret whispered. "Tell him we were lost." The room fell silent. Then Eli came barreling out of the hallway at full speed. Annie behind him. "Mom," he shouted. "Annie says rich people have movie rooms." Rachel sighed. "Please stop saying rich people." "But do they?" Annie answered for herself. "We have a whole room with giant chairs and popcorn machines." Eli gasped. "No way." Margaret laughed weakly through tears. William crouched to Eli's level. "Would you like to see it sometime?" The boy's eyes widened. "Really? Really?" Eli looked at Rachel. She hesitated, then nodded. His shout of joy nearly shook the windows. That Saturday, Eli and Rachel came to Whitmore Manor for the first time. The house stunned Eli speechless for nearly 30 seconds. A personal record. According to Annie, he stood in the marble foyer with his mouth hanging open while Annie grabbed his hand and dragged him inside. "This way, I got to show you everything." Margaret cried again when Eli saw the grand staircase. Rachel looked so overwhelmed she nearly turned around twice before William quietly reassured her. No one expected perfection from her here. That afternoon, William watched from the library doorway as Annie and Eli raced through the house, laughing like children who had known each other forever. At one point, Eli skidded to a stop in front of Daniel's old portrait hanging in the upstairs hall. He stared, then looked at William. "That's him," he whispered. William nodded. "My daddy." "Yes." Eli stepped closer to the painting. For a long moment, he simply stared at the face of the man he would never remember, then quietly asked, "Did he know about me?" William's throat tightened. He walked over and knelt beside him. "Yes," he said softly. "He knew, and he loved you very much." Eli kept staring at the portrait, then reached out and touched the painted edge of Daniel's sleeve. "He looks like me." William swallowed hard. "Yes," he whispered, "he does." And as William watched his nephew stand beneath his father's portrait in the house Daniel had once called home, he knew this was no longer just about reunion. It was about restoration, about rebuilding what pride had destroyed, about giving Daniel's son the life his father had wanted for him, no matter the cost. Because for the first time in many years, Widmore Manor no longer felt like a monument to old ghosts. It felt like a family beginning again. The first real fight happened 3 weeks later. Until then, everything had unfolded with a strange, fragile grace William barely trusted. Rachel and Eli had begun spending most weekends at Widmore Manor. Annie treated Eli less like a newly discovered cousin and more like a long-lost partner in crime. Margaret, still carrying the grief of years stolen by lies, doted on the boy with the fierce tenderness of a grandmother trying to make up for lost time. Eli's medical appointments had been transferred quietly to one of the best pediatric cardiologists in Chicago. And for the first time in years, Rachel was no longer studying every pharmacy receipt with panic in her eyes. For a brief moment, it almost felt easy. William should have known better. The trouble began on a gray Sunday afternoon in the kitchen. The children were seated at the large breakfast table decorating sugar cookies under Margaret's supervision, while Rachel stood near the marble island, helping one of the housekeepers package leftovers. William entered midway through Annie loudly, insisting Eli had cheated by eating more frosting than he put on the cookies. "I did not cheat," Eli argued. "You did, too. That's quality control." William laughed under his breath as he crossed toward the coffee machine. Then he heard Rachel say quietly to Margaret, "We appreciate everything, truly, but Eli and I need to start talking about going home more often." William looked up immediately. Margaret's smile faltered. "Going home?" Rachel nodded. "He's getting comfortable here, too comfortable." She glanced toward the children. "I don't want him forgetting where he comes from." William sat down his coffee cup. The room subtly changed. Margaret noticed first and wisely busied herself with the children. William turned to Rachel. "What exactly does that mean?" Rachel met his gaze steadily. "It means I don't want my son growing up thinking marble floors and chauffeurs are normal." William's voice remained calm. "No one is asking him to forget his life." "No," she replied sharper now. "You're asking him to replace it." The kitchen fell quiet. Even Annie sensed enough tension to stop licking frosting from her fingers. William stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Rachel, no, let's be honest for once." Months of swallowed fear and pride surfaced all at once in her expression. "Every week there's another doctor, another tutor, another invitation, another offer, a better school, better clothes, better opportunities." Her eyes glistened with emotion. "At what point does helping become turning him into someone else?" William stared at her. "You think I'm trying to erase who he is?" "I think rich people always believe generosity makes them harmless." That hit harder than she intended. William's jaw tightened. "Everything I've done has been for Eli. And maybe some of it's been for your guilt too, Sans." Margaret slowly ushered the children from the room with the instincts of a woman who had survived many family wars. William and Rachel remained alone in the kitchen. He spoke first, voice colder now. "If you have something to say, say it plainly." Rachel's composure cracked. I think you're trying to make up for losing Daniel by fixing Eli. Her chest rose and fell unevenly. And I think one day you'll wake up and realize he doesn't belong in this world. And then what? You get bored. Move on. Send us back where we came from. William looked at her in stunned disbelief. You truly think that little of me? I think I've spent my whole life watching powerful people promise help until helping became inconvenient. He stared at her for several seconds, then quieter than before. Do you know why I haven't pushed harder? Rachel frowned, thrown by the shift in tone. Because every day since I met Eli, I've known you're waiting for me to prove Daniel was wrong to trust me. The words landed like a slap. William stepped closer. My brother believed I would understand him if given the chance. Those were his words. His voice roughened, and every time you look at me like I'm one bad a day away from becoming my father, you're telling me he was wrong. Rachel's eyes widened. For a moment, neither spoke. Then Eli's laughter floated faintly from the next room. The sound softened something in both of them. Rachel looked away first. Her voice dropped to a whisper. I don't know how to do this. William's anger faded instantly. He understood then that this was not defiance. It was fear. Fear from a woman who had spent years surviving alone and now found herself inside a world where every kindness felt large enough to become dangerous. He exhaled slowly. Neither do I. That seemed to surprise her. William leaned against the counter, suddenly looking less like a billionaire and more like a tired man trying to build something from ruins. I have spent my entire adult life being good at things that make money, he said quietly. Business, negotiation, strategy, growth. But this, he glanced toward the doorway where the children's voices echoed. Family is not a thing you can control into working. Rachel's shoulders loosened slightly. I don't want Eli to grow up ashamed of where he came from, she said. He won't. You can't promise that. Yes, I can. William met her gaze directly. Because if anyone in this family ever makes him feel lesser for how he was raised, they answered to me. She searched his face, then quietly asked, even your own family? William's expression hardened. Especially my own family, as if summoned by fate to test that promise. The trouble arrived that same evening. The Whitmore family's annual winter dinner had not been canceled despite recent revelations. Several extended relatives still attended out of habit, obligation, or opportunism. William had considered postponing it. Margaret insisted that hiding Eli and Rachel would send the wrong message, so they came. At first, the evening proceeded tolerably. Eli wore the tiny navy blazer Annie had insisted made him look fancy and important. Rachel looked beautiful but visibly uncomfortable in the dining room full of crystal, silver, and old family portraits. Annie and Eli sat beside each other, sharing whispered commentary on every course. Margaret remained close to Rachel, perhaps sensing the younger woman might flee at any moment. Then, William's cousin, Theodore Whitmore, ruined everything. Theodore was 50, overfed, perpetually smug, and had inherited just enough wealth to mistake it for accomplishment. He had been drinking. He looked down the table toward Eli and said with false brightness, "Well, I suppose Daniel always did have a flair for surprises, though I imagine bringing this sort of complication into the family would have given your father apoplexy." The room froze. Rachel's fork stopped midair. Margaret turned white. William set down his wine glass with terrifying calm. "Theodore," he said quietly, "choose your next words carefully." But Theodore, being both arrogant and drunk, only laughed. "Oh, don't be dramatic. I'm simply saying blood may be blood, but surely no one expects us to pretend this whole thing isn't awkward. A child from some random apartment with a waitress." His sentence ended in a crash. William had crossed the room so fast, no one saw him move. He grabbed Theodore by the front of his jacket and slammed him back against the wall hard enough to rattle the framed paintings. Every voice in the room died. William's face had gone deathly still, the kind of stillness more frightening than rage. "You will never," he said in a voice barely above a whisper, "speak about my nephew that way again. Theodore, pale William, you will apologize to Rachel. You will apologize to Eli." His grip tightened. Then you will leave this house and never return unless invited." No one moved. No one breathed. Theodore's face reamed. "You're choosing them over your own family." William released him with a shove. "No," he said coldly. "I am choosing family over people who forgot what that means." Theodore looked around the room for support. He found none. Margaret stood first, then the others. On B1, a silent judgment. Theodore straightened his jacket with trembling hands, muttered a strangled apology toward Rachel, then fled. The front door slammed moments later. The dining room remained silent. Then Eli's small voice broke the tension. "Am I in trouble?" William turned. The little boy looked frightened now, eyes darting between adults. William crossed the room and knelt beside him immediately. "Nobody." Then why was everybody yelling? William glanced at Rachel, then back at Eli because sometimes grown-ups forget how to behave. Eli seemed to consider that, then nodded. "Yeah, my preschool teacher says that, too." The room erupted into relieved laughter. The tension shattered. But later that night, after Rachel and Eli had gone upstairs to the guest suite, and Annie had fallen asleep mid-sentence, describing the fight as better than TV, Rachel found William alone in his study. He stood at the window, jacket off, tie loosened. She entered quietly. "I didn't need you to do that," she said. William didn't turn. "Yes, you did." She came closer. He faced her then. Rachel's eyes glistened. "No one's ever stood up for us like that before." William's expression softened. "Well," he said quietly. "Get used to it." She laughed weakly through tears. Then, after a pause, asked, "Did you mean it about Eli being family?" William looked toward the dark hallway where the children slept. "With everything I have," Rachel nodded slowly. And for the first time since they met, the last of her fear began to give way to trust. Because that night, in front of the entire Whitmore family, William Whitmore had drawn a line in blood, and everyone in that house now understood exactly which side he stood on. After the winter dinner, something changed in the house, not outwardly, not in any dramatic obvious way. Whitmore Manor still stood polished and immaculate beneath its chandeliers. The staff still moved with quiet efficiency through marble hallways. The fireplaces still burned in the evenings, and Annie still left crayons in places crayons had no business being. Yet beneath all of it, the atmosphere had shifted. The household no longer treated Eli and Rachel as temporary guests or delicate complications. They were spoken to by name, now included, naturally, expected, and perhaps most importantly of all, they began to believe they belonged. It happened in small moments first. Rachel no longer flinched when the housekeeper asked what she preferred for breakfast. She stopped apologizing every time Eli spilled something in the playroom. She gradually stopped standing in doorways like a woman afraid someone might revoke her invitation at any moment. Eli changed too. The boy who had first entered Whitmore Manor with the wide-eyed caution of a child visiting another planet now ran through its halls with the confidence of someone who had memorized every corner. He knew which stair creaked near the library. He knew the cook would sneak him chocolate chip cookies if he asked politely. He knew Annie kept emergency candy in the third drawer of her bedroom desk and that Mrs. Campbell pretended not to know. William noticed all of it. He also noticed something else. For the first time in his life, Whitmore Manor sounded like children lived there, not one child. It made the old house feel less like a monument and more like a home. On a Thursday afternoon, William returned from the office earlier than usual, and found Annie and Eli sprawled across the library rug, building a crooked fortress from leather-bound books they had absolutely not been given permission to use. Rachel sat nearby in an armchair with a laptop open on her knees, trying and failing to look stern. "Those are first editions," William said dryly from the doorway. Both children froze. Annie smiled too quickly. "We were being careful," Eli added helpfully. "Very careful." William folded his arms. "And what exactly is this?" "A castle," Annie said. "For dragons," Eli clarified. William looked to Rachel. "You approved this." Rachel gave him a helpless shrug. "They wore me down." He stared at the fortress, then at the children, then sighed with theatrical resignation. At least put blankets over it if you're going to commit this much felony in one afternoon." The children exploded with cheers. Rachel laughed, and in that moment, brief and bright and painfully ordinary, William felt something inside him settle. He had not realized how much of his life had been spent in quiet rooms. How much silence wealth purchased, how empty success sounded in a house too large for one man and one little girl. But now the place breathed. Later that evening, while Annie and Eli were in the movie room arguing over whether pirates could beat dinosaurs in a fight, Rachel found William in the kitchen pouring coffee. "You spoil them," she said. He glanced over. That accusation coming from the woman who bought Eli a fourth stuffed dinosaur yesterday. He needed that dinosaur, William smirked. Naturally, Rachel smiled, then grew quieter. "I got offered a full-time bookkeeping position this morning," she said. William sat down the coffee pot. "That's good. It's in Naperville." His expression shifted. "Long commute," he said. Rachel nodded. "Very. Sans." William understood immediately what she was really saying. The job would take her and Eli farther away. Less time at the manor. Less time here. Rachel studied him carefully. "I haven't answered yet." William leaned against the counter. "Do you want it?" She hesitated, then admitted, "I don't know." Because Rachel gave a faint laugh, because for the first time in years, life feels stable and I don't trust stable. Stable usually means something bad is coming. William looked at her for a long moment, then quietly said, "You don't have to leave just because things are going well." She blinked. He held her gaze. "If part of you is refusing happiness because you're waiting to be punished for it, that ends now." Rachel stared at him. No one had ever said anything like that to her. Before she could answer, the moment shattered. Mrs. Campbell entered briskly, her expression troubled. "Sir, you need to take this." She held out the cordless phone. William frowned. "Who is it?" "Northwestern Children's Cardiology." The blood drained from Rachel's face. William took the phone immediately. "This is Whitmore." He listened. His expression changed. Then he lowered the phone slowly. Rachel's voice came barely above a whisper. "What happened?" William looked at her. Eli's latest scans came back. Her hands trembled, and William's jaw tightened. "The arrhythmia is worsening." The room seemed to stop. Rachel's face went white. "No," she whispered. William stepped toward her. "No." Her breathing quickened. "No. They said he was stable. They said he was." Now they're concerned. Her eyes filled instantly. "How bad?" William's voice softened. "They want additional testing tomorrow. They may need to consider surgery sooner than expected." Rachel sank into the nearest chair like her legs had given out. The color drained from her face. In the next room, Eli laughed at something Annie shouted from the movie room. The sound nearly shattered her. "He's 4, she whispered. "He's just 4. William knelt beside her. "We are going to get him the best care possible." "What if it's not enough?" "It will be." "You don't know that." His voice sharpened, not in anger, but certainty. "No, I don't. But I know this. He will not face it alone." Rachel covered her mouth, tears spilling over. The next 24 hours passed in a blur. Private specialists, emergency consultations, blood work, imaging. Eli, too young to understand the severity of any of it, remained mostly cheerful until the IV needle came out. Then he cried for Annie before anyone else. Annie naturally marched into the prep room despite every nurse trying to stop her. "I'm his cousin," she informed them. "He needs me." No one in the room had the courage to argue. William watched from the doorway as Annie climbed into the chair beside Eli and held his hand through the needle placement, telling him in stern whispers that brave boys got extra dessert after hospitals. Rachel broke down, crying in the hallway at the sight of it. William stood beside her, silent. She leaned into him before she seemed to realize she was doing it. He did not move away. The chief cardiologist met them later that afternoon. His expression was careful, measured, professional. William hated that look instantly. "Tell us plainly," he said. The doctor folded his hands. "Eli's condition has progressed faster than expected. His heart rhythm is becoming increasingly unstable." He looked toward Rachel. Without intervention, this could become life-threatening. Rachel made a sound somewhere between a gasp and a sob. William's voice stayed level. Treatment surgery is strongly recommended. Silence. Rachel stared blankly. Heart surgery. The doctor nodded gently. Yes. She shook her head over and over. No, he's too little. He's too little. William took her hand before she realized she needed someone to steady her. When the doctor answered, as soon as we can schedule it. That night, the house was quiet. Too quiet. Even Annie seemed subdued, sensing the seriousness hanging over the adults. Eli fell asleep early, exhausted from testing and tears. Rachel sat alone in the guest suite beside his bed, watching him breathe. William found her there after midnight. She did not look up when he entered. "I'm scared," she whispered. He stood beside her in the dark. "Sua." That surprised her enough to make her turn. "You." William looked at the sleeping child. "He's my nephew." His voice roughened. "I just found him. I'm not losing him now." Rachel stared at him, then finally asked the question she had been holding back for weeks. "Why are you doing all this?" William answered without hesitation. "Because Daniel can't." Rachel broke. Then she leaned into him and wept against his chest while he held her in the dim light of Eli's bedside lamp. Both of them listening to the fragile rhythm of a little boy's heartbeat through hospital monitors still echoing in memory. And as William stood there with his brother's family in his arms, he understood with terrible clarity. Love was no longer the question. Now came the test of what love could survive. The morning of Eli's surgery arrived under a sky the color of steel. Snow drifted in soft sheets across the city as black SUVs pulled into the private entrance of Northwestern Children's Hospital before sunrise. No one in the car spoke much. Annie sat unusually still beside Eli in the back seat, clutching the stuffed dinosaur he insisted needed to come for medical support. Rachel kept one hand wrapped tightly around her son's shoulder as though she might hold him together by force of will alone. William sat in the front staring out the window with the hard silence of a man trying not to imagine the worst. Inside the hospital, everything moved too quickly. Forms, concur, bracelet, vitals, nurses with kind eyes and rehearsed voices. Rachel answered questions in a daze while William handled the logistics she could no longer process. He signed where necessary, spoke to specialists, coordinated with hospital administration, and moved through the machinery of crisis with the calm precision of a man used to fixing impossible things. But none of his money, none of his influence, none of his power could do the one thing he wanted most. He could not take his nephew's place on that operating table. Eli was dressed in a tiny hospital gown far too large for him, the sleeves hanging past his wrists until Annie rolled them back herself. "There," she said, nodding with satisfaction. "Now you look less silly." "I still look silly," Eli muttered. Rachel gave a shaky laugh through tears. A nurse entered with a clipboard. "We'll be taking him back in 10 minutes. The room went still. 10 minutes. Rachel sat down so abruptly, William thought she might faint. Eli looked from face to face, finally sensing the fear adults had tried so hard to hide. "Am I going to die?" The question shattered the room. Rachel made a choking sound. William crossed the room in 2 strides and knelt directly in front of the boy. "No," he said firmly. Eli searched his face. "Promise." William took the small hand in his. "I promise everyone in this hospital is going to do everything they can to make your heart better." "That's not what I asked." The blunt honesty of children nearly undid him. William swallowed, then said the only truth he could give. "I promise you won't face any of it alone." Eli studied him for several seconds, then nodded once. "Okay." Annie suddenly climbed into the bed beside him and hugged him so hard the nurse laughed softly. "You better not be brave without me," she whispered fiercely. Eli hugged her back. "I'll try not to." When the nurse came to wheel him toward surgery, Rachel broke. She clung to her son with both arms, sobbing openly into his hair while Eli, confused, but trying to be brave, patted her shoulder and whispered, "It's okay, Mommy." William turned away briefly because the sight nearly shattered him. Then Eli was gone. The waiting was worse than anything William had anticipated. Boardrooms had taught him how to endure tension. Business had taught him patience. But no amount of power prepared a man to sit in a hospital waiting room while a child he loved lay unconscious with surgeons opening his chest. Hours crawled. Margaret arrived and sat beside Rachel in silence, holding her hand. Annie fell asleep against Mrs. Campbell after insisting she was not tired at all for nearly 30 minutes. William paced, then paced more, then stood at the window, then paced again. At one point, Frank Donovan arrived with coffee and left it untouched on a side table because no one remembered to drink it. Finally, after what felt like years, the surgeon entered. Everyone stood at once. Rachel could barely breathe. "Well," the doctor smiled, and the entire room collapsed with relief before he even spoke. "The surgery went well." Rachel sobbed so violently Margaret had to catch her. William closed his eyes for one dizzy second. His knees nearly buckled. The doctor continued. "There were complications during one portion of the procedure, but we corrected them. He'll need monitoring for several days, but the prognosis is very good." William exhaled a breath he felt he had been holding for 12 hours. Rachel wept openly into her hands. Margaret whispered, "Thank God." Annie woke with a snort and blinked around wildly. "What happened?" William crouched beside her, smiling for the first time all day. "He's okay." She threw both arms around his neck. Recovery was slow, painful. Masu. Eli woke groggy and frightened, crying whenever anyone moved too quickly near the IV lines. Rachel barely left his bedside. Annie spent every allowed visiting hour there, bringing coloring books, toy dinosaurs, and increasingly absurd stories about the adventures they would have once Eli was medically cool again. William came every day, sometimes twice. On the third evening after surgery, he entered Eli's room carrying a small wrapped box. The boy lay propped against pillows, pale and exhausted, but alert. "What's that?" Eli asked suspiciously. "A present for getting surgery." William nodded. Eli narrowed his eyes. "That seems unfair. Annie didn't have surgery, and she gets presents all the time." William laughed. "A valid point." Eli opened the box. Inside lay a silver wristwatch, small, elegant, clearly custom-made for a child. Eli's eyes widened. "Whoa." William sat on the edge of the chair beside him. "It belonged to your father when he was a little older than you," he said softly. "My parents gave it to him when he got his first report card with all A's. He treasured it." Eli held the watch carefully, reverently. "He did." William nodded. "He said it made him feel grown up." Eli looked down at the watch, then back up. "Why are you giving it to me?" William's throat tightened. "Because it should have been yours one day anyway." The boy stared at him, then whispered, "Uncle William." It was the first time he had said it. William froze. Eli smiled shyly. "Can I call you that?" For perhaps the first time in years, William Whitmore was speechless. He swallowed hard, then nodded once. "Yes," he managed. Eli grinned. Rachel, standing near the window, turned away quickly to hide tears. That night, after Eli fell asleep, Rachel followed William into the hallway. "You're good with him," she said quietly. William leaned against the wall outside the room. "I'm trying." "No," she said, "you're not trying. You just are." He looked through the small glass window into Eli's room. "He makes it easy." Rachel stood beside him. After a long silence, she said softly, "He's starting to look for you first when something happens." William did not answer because he had noticed. When Eli got scared, he reached for Rachel first. Then William. When Annie bragged about her school projects, Eli immediately wanted William's opinion, too. When doctors entered the room, the boy's eyes searched automatically for the two adults he trusted most. Rachel's voice softened. "He's attached." William stared through the glass. "So am I." The admission hung between them. Rachel turned toward him, then said the thing both of them had been avoiding for weeks. "He asks if we can live here now." William's eyes shifted to hers. Rachel let out a shaky breath. "Every night since surgery." Silence. Then William said quietly, "What do you want?" Rachel looked through the window at her sleeping son. At first I thought moving in would mean losing myself. Her eyes glistened. Now I think maybe refusing would mean keeping him from something good just because I'm scared. William said nothing. Rachel looked at him fully. If we do this, she whispered, it has to be because we're family, not charity, not obligation. William held her gaze. Agreed. She nodded slowly, then smiled through tears. Okay. The single word hit him harder than any business victory ever had. William stared at her. Okay. Rachel laughed softly. Yes, William. Okay. He exhaled slowly, almost disbelieving. Then both of them looked back through the glass at Eli, at the little boy whose failing heart had forced them all to stop pretending life offered endless time. And in the quiet hospital hallway, with the machines inside Eli's room now beating steady and strong, William Whitmore realized the broken branches of his family tree were beginning at last to grow back together. Eli moved into Whitmore Manor on a rainy Tuesday. Annie had been counting down for 3 days and treated the occasion with the solemn excitement of a national holiday. By 8 o'clock in the morning, she had already rearranged half the guest wing, announced that Eli's room needed more dinosaur energy and attempted to assign the household staff official cuisine-related duties until Mrs. Campbell gently informed her that was not how employment worked. Rachel arrived in the driveway just after lunch with everything she and Eli owned packed into the back of a rented van. William stood beneath the front portico as the vehicle pulled up, his hands in the pockets of his coat, watching quietly. For a moment, no one moved. Rachel sat behind the wheel, gripping it too tightly. William understood immediately what this moment meant to her. Moving boxes into a rich man's house was not simply changing addresses. It was surrendering the life she had built alone, trusting someone else with the future she had spent years protecting by herself. He walked down the steps before she could talk herself out of it. You made it, he said gently. Rachel gave a strained smile. Still deciding if this is bravery or insanity. Could be both. That earned the smallest laugh. Then Eli burst out of the passenger seat with enough energy to suggest his surgery had given him a new engine entirely. I live here now, he shouted to no one in particular. Annie screamed from the doorway. Yes, you do. The two children collided in the driveway and nearly knocked each other over. Rachel watched them with wet eyes. William quietly took the first box from the van without asking. She looked at him. You don't have to carry those. Yes, I do. She frowned. Why? He shifted the box in his arms. Because if I let staff carry every single thing you own while I stand here in a coat giving instructions, you'll spend the rest of the week hating me. That startled a real laugh out of her. By sunset, Rachel and Eli were moved into the east guest wing, close enough to the family bedrooms to feel connected, private enough that Rachel did not feel swallowed by the scale of the house. Eli's room now held a proper bed, shelves of books, enough dinosaur-themed decor to satisfy even Annie's exacting standards, and one framed photograph William had placed on the nightstand before anyone arrived. A copy of Daniel's portrait, smaller and more personal than the grand oil painting upstairs. When Eli saw it, he stopped cold. That's my daddy. William nodded. I thought maybe you'd want him near. Eli walked slowly to the nightstand and picked up the frame. He stared at the picture for a long moment, then whispered, "Thank you." William had to look away. That night, after the children were asleep and the house had quieted, Rachel found William in the library nursing a cup of coffee gone cold. She stood in the doorway for a moment before speaking. You did all this very quickly. William glanced up. I've been told efficiency is one of my flaws. Rachel smiled faintly and stepped inside. The fire cast warm light across the shelves, softening the hard angles of the room. She looked tired, emotionally wrung out, but lighter than she had in weeks. I keep waiting for someone to tell me this isn't real, she admitted. William sat down his cup. It's real. She nodded slowly. Then her expression shifted. There's something I need to ask you. His face grew serious. Anything. Rachel folded her arms loosely, gathering courage. What exactly are we to you now? William frowned slightly. What do you mean? She met his gaze directly. To Eli, your Uncle William. To Annie, we're family. To Margaret, I'm apparently the daughter-in-law she never got to keep. A faint emotional smile touched her mouth. But in this house, in your life, what are we? The honesty of the question caught him. He considered her carefully before answering. You are my brother's family, he said. Which makes you mine. Rachel held his gaze, then asked softly. And if this becomes difficult, it already is difficult. No, she said quietly. I mean later. If people talk, if the board talks, if investors ask why a billionaire moved his late brother's girlfriend and her child into his house, if rumors start. Her eyes searched his. What then? William stood, then walked toward her until only a few feet separated them. Then they can talk. Rachel blinked. He lowered his voice. I spent too many years living by rules written by dead men who cared more about appearances than people. I won't do that anymore. Her eyes filled. William's expression softened. No one in this city gets to decide who belongs in my family except me. Rachel stared at him for a long moment, then whispered, Daniel would have loved hearing you say that. The words hit him hard. He looked toward the fire. He should have heard it from me himself. Rachel stepped closer. You can't keep punishing yourself for that forever. He gave a quiet, bitter laugh. Watch me. She shook her head. No, Daniel loved you too much for that. Silence settled between them. Then footsteps thundered in the hallway. Annie and Eli burst into the room in pajamas. Both clearly supposed to be asleep. There's a problem, Annie announced. William straightened instantly. What happened? Eli pointed dramatically. There's thunder. Rachel blinked. That's the emergency. It's loud, Eli said defensively. Annie crossed her arms. He says storms are suspicious. They are suspicious. William rubbed a hand over his face. Rachel muttered, we have created monsters. The children naturally refused to sleep alone after that, and so for the first time in what had once been a house built for rigid order and careful appearances. The Whitmore family ended the night in complete chaos. Blankets were dragged into the upstairs sitting room. A movie was turned on. Hot chocolate appeared. Eli fell asleep halfway through with his head on Annie's shoulder. Annie lasted another 20 minutes before collapsing against William's side. Rachel sat beside them beneath a blanket, watching both children sleep while rain tapped against the windows. Margaret, who had wandered in at some point with tea and no intention of leaving, sat in the armchair, smiling quietly at the scene. William looked around the room at Annie sprawled against him, at Eli asleep beside her, at Rachel with her son's blanket tangled in her lap, at his mother, calmer than she had been in years. And for the first time since Daniel walked out of Whitmore Manor all those years ago, the house felt whole. Margaret seemed to sense his thoughts. She spoke softly into the warm, quiet. Your father would have hated this. William glanced at her. Then, unexpectedly, Rachel laughed. A sharp, helpless laugh that startled everyone. Margaret joined her. Then, William did too. Soon, all three adults were laughing quietly over the sleeping children as thunder rolled harmlessly outside. After a while, when the laughter faded, Margaret looked at William and said something he would remember for the rest of his life. Your brother would have loved it. William turned toward the sleeping children again. And in the flickering light of the television, with Annie's hand still clutching his sleeve and Eli breathing softly nearby, he allowed himself for the first time in years to feel something beyond grief when he thought of Daniel. Not pain, not regret, peace. Because the brother he had lost was gone. But his legacy slept safely under this roof. And as thunder rolled over the city beyond the windows, William Whitmore finally understood that some families were not rebuilt through grand gestures or dramatic promises. They were rebuilt in quiet rooms, in late-night laughter, in children who no longer had to sleep afraid, and in the choice made over and over again to stay. For a while, life settled into something dangerously close to happiness. Spring arrived slowly in Chicago, thawing the city one gray morning at a time. Snow melted from the estate grounds. Bare trees along the Whitmore property budded green again. The children began spending afternoons outdoors, racing across the lawn with the reckless energy of the fully recovered and the permanently fearless. Eli's health improved steadily. His color returned. His laughter came easier. The constant shadows beneath Rachel's eyes faded little by little as she adjusted to the strange miracle of sleeping through nights without listening for a sick child's breathing. And William, though he would never admit it aloud, built his life around those changes with quiet devotion. He began leaving the office earlier. He rearranged meetings around school pickups. He learned the names of Eli's favorite dinosaurs, Annie's least favorite vegetables, and exactly how much bribery was required to get both children into formal clothes without mutiny. He had never planned for his life to become this. He could no longer imagine wanting anything else, which was why the call from the board chairman came like poison and clean water. William took it in his office just after lunch. "William," Arthur Langley said over speakerphone, his voice carrying the careful stiffness of a man pretending to be diplomatic. "We need to discuss a matter of concern." William leaned back in his chair. "If this is about quarterly projections, send the report." "It isn't." That sharpened his attention. Arthur cleared his throat. "There's growing discussion among investors regarding your domestic situation." William's expression cooled instantly. "My what?" "The woman and child currently residing in your home." "Sans." Then William said very softly, "Continue." Arthur hesitated, sensing too late that he had stepped into dangerous territory. "Several stakeholders feel the arrangement may create reputational complications. There are rumors circulating that your judgment has become compromised. Some are questioning whether moving a former lover's widow and her child into the family estate." Rachel was not Daniel's widow. But William barely registered the error. He was already standing. "If you ever speak about them in that tone again," he said quietly, "you will no longer be employed by this company." Arthur's breath caught. "William, I'm merely relaying concerns." "Then relay this one back." His voice turned to ice. "My private life is not subject to shareholder approval." He ended the call, hard. The office fell silent. Frank Donovan, seated nearby reviewing contracts, slowly lowered his pen. "Bad." William stared at the phone, then said with lethal calm, "Find out who started it." Frank nodded once. "Already suspected you'd ask." Within 24 hours, he had his answer. Theodore Whitmore, William's cousin, had not forgiven the humiliation of being thrown out of winter dinner. Quietly, vindictively, he had been whispering through donor circles and board contacts for months, painting Rachel as an opportunist. Eli is an embarrassing complication. William is emotionally compromised. By sunset, William had enough proof to bury him. He did not. He chose something worse. That evening, the extended Whitmore family was summoned to the estate. No explanation, no room for refusal. They gathered in the formal sitting room just after 7. Tension already crackling beneath polished manners and old money smiles. Theodore arrived late, looking smug in the way foolish men often did before disaster. Rachel remained upstairs with the children at William's request. Margaret sat near the fireplace, silent and watchful. William entered last. He did not sit. Instead, he stood at the center of the room holding a folder in one hand. His voice was calm, controlled, terrifying. "Someone in this family has spent the past several months spreading lies about Rachel Carter and Elijah Whitmore." The room went still. Theodore shifted. William's gaze locked onto him immediately. "You've been very busy." Theodore laughed weakly. "Now hold on." William threw the folder onto the table. Printed emails scattered across polished wood. Private messages, phone looks, witness statements, every whisper Theodore had spread, every lie. The room erupted into stunned murmurs. Margaret's face hardened into something regal and merciless. Theodore went pale. "You had me followed," he snapped. William stepped closer. "I had the truth collected." Theodore straightened defensively. "I was protecting the family." William's expression turned deadly. "No," he said, "you were protecting your prejudice." Theodore scoffed. "You've let one sob story blind you to reality." She saw a rich man with guilt and moved herself right into the estate. A slap cracked through the room. No one moved. Margaret Whitmore stood with her hands still raised. Theodore stared at her in shock. His own mother had never once struck him in public. Margaret's voice shook with fury. "That woman raised my grandson alone while this family lived in comfort." Too blind and proud to know he existed. You will not dishonor her in this house. Theodore's face reamed. You can't be serious. William cut him off. Yes, he said coldly. We are. He reached into his coat and withdrew a sealed envelope. You were removed from every Whitmore charitable board effective immediately. Your consulting contract with Whitmore Holdings is terminated. Your access to family trust voting privileges has been suspended pending formal review. Theodore's face drained of color. You can't do that. William met his gaze. I already did. Panic flickered in Theodore's eyes. You're destroying my career over this woman. William took one step closer. No, he said quietly. I'm destroying it because you mistook cruelty for class. Theodore looked desperately around the room. No one came to his defense. Not one person. Margaret stood first, then the others followed on everyone, turning their backs. Theodore stared at them in disbelief, then at William, then finally stormed from the room in humiliation. The front door slammed hard enough to shake the glass. Silence remained. William looked around at the rest of the family. His voice lowered. Let me be perfectly clear. Rachel Carter and Elijah Whitmore are family. If anyone here has a problem with that, walk out now and save us both time. No one moved. No one dared. The matter was settled. Later that night, Rachel stood on the upstairs balcony outside the guest wing, staring over the dark lawn when William found her. She had heard enough to understand what happened. You didn't have to go that far, she said softly. William stepped beside her. Yes, I did. She turned toward him. They'll resent me more now. They'll fear disrespecting you more. Rachel studied him in the moonlight, then asked quietly, why do you keep fighting this hard for us? William looked out across the grounds before answering. Because I know what it costs when good people stay silent. The honesty of it stole her breath. Rachel stepped closer. You really loved him, didn't you? William's eyes remained on the darkness. He was my little brother, his voice roughened. For years, I thought grief meant missing him. He swallowed. Turns out grief is realizing all the ways you failed someone after they're gone. Rachel reached for his hand. He looked down at their joined fingers in surprise. Then she said softly, Daniel would be proud of who you're becoming. That nearly undid him. He turned toward her fully. Neither moved away for one suspended moment. Something changed between them. Something deeper than gratitude, more dangerous than comfort. Then a shriek shattered the moment. There you are. Annie burst onto the balcony in pajamas. Eli close behind. We're making blanket forts and you're both required. Annie announced. Eli nodded gravely. Very required. Rachel laughed first. William followed. And just like that, the moment passed. But later, lying awake in the dark, William stared at the ceiling and understood something he had not wanted to admit. What had begun as duty had become love. Not just for Eli, not just for Annie, for all of them. And that realization changed everything because protecting family out of obligation was one thing. Protecting the people you loved that made a man dangerous. Summer arrived in full bloom and with it came the first season in years that Whitmore Manor no longer felt haunted. The gardens exploded with color beneath the June sun. Children's laughter drifted across the lawn nearly every afternoon. Annie and Eli spent most days racing through sprinklers, building forts beneath hedges, and turning every outdoor meal into some form of elaborate game involving pirates, secret kingdoms, or dinosaurs in formal wear. Even the staff had stopped pretending to be annoyed when muddy footprints appeared where muddy footprints absolutely should not. For the first time in decades, the estate felt lived in. And William, despite all his discipline, despite all his caution, despite the part of him that still feared losing anything he loved, allowed himself to enjoy it. He stood at the kitchen window one warm Saturday morning watching Annie and Eli chase each other across the backyard with garden hoses while Rachel sat on the patio laughing into her coffee. Margaret entered beside him with a tray of fruit. You're staring again, she said. William did not look away. At what? At the woman you're in love with. He nearly dropped his coffee. Margaret smirked. Please, I raised you. You had that exact expression at 16 when the senator's daughter smiled at you during Easter service. William exhaled sharply. Rachel is family. Margaret raised an eyebrow. That is not a denial. He said nothing. She softened. You know, Daniel would not resent it. That made him turn. Margaret's expression gentled. Daniel loved Rachel, she said quietly. But Daniel is gone and life is for the living, William. She paused. Don't spend so much time honoring the dead that you miss what's standing in front of you. He looked away because the problem was not that he hadn't considered it. It was that he had far too often in every quiet glance. Every laugh shared after the children went to bed. Every moment Rachel trusted him with something she once carried alone. The feeling had grown slowly, naturally, until denying it became pointless. And still, he had no idea what to do with it. His answer came sooner than expected. That afternoon, while Annie and Eli were engaged in an increasingly chaotic water balloon battle, Rachel found William in the library reviewing contracts. She leaned in the doorway. Can I ask you something strange? William looked up. Given this family's recent history, strange is relative. She smiled faintly, then asked, do you think Daniel would hate me for being happy here? The question struck him silent. Rachel stepped farther into the room, arms folded tightly as if holding herself together. I think about it more than I should, she admitted. Some days I catch myself laughing with you or enjoying this life or feeling. She searched for the word safe. Her voice dropped and then I feel guilty for it. William rose slowly from behind the desk. Rachel, what if moving on means forgetting him? She whispered. William crossed the room until they stood only a few feet apart. Then he said quietly, Daniel loved you enough to leave everything for you. Tears filled her eyes. He loved Eli before he ever met him. She nodded once. William's voice softened further. A man who loved that deeply would never want the people he loved to spend their lives trapped in grief. Rachel stared at him, then whispered, how do you know? He swallowed. Because if I died tomorrow, his voice roughened, and Annie was left alone in this world, I would pray someone loved her enough to stay. Rachel's breath caught. The air changed. Neither moved. Then Rachel stepped forward slowly, carefully, as if giving him every chance to walk away. William did not. When she kissed him, it was soft and trembling and full of every unsaid thing that had been building for months, for one suspended heartbeat. Neither of them moved. Then William kissed her back. Not cautiously, not politely, but with the full force of a man who had denied wanting something for far too long. When they finally parted, both breathless, Rachel let out a disbelieving laugh. Well, she whispered, that happened. William rested his forehead briefly against hers. Yes, he murmured, it did. A loud gasp shattered the moment they sprang apart. Annie stood in the doorway. Eli beside her. Both children stared in delighted horror. You kissed my mom, Eli shouted. You kissed Rachel, Annie screamed. Panic erupted instantly. Rachel covered her face. William, who had negotiated billion-dollar mergers without blinking, looked momentarily helpless. Then Annie squealed, are you getting married? No, Rachel and William shouted together. Eli frowned. Then why were you doing mouth stuff? Rachel made a choking sound. William stepped in with the desperation of a man under active attack. Adults sometimes express affection physically. Annie narrowed her eyes. Gross. Eli nodded. Super gross. Then both children immediately began shouting over one another. Does this mean Ellie's my brother now? Do I get two dads? Can we have another Christmas? Are you going to kiss again? Rachel buried her face in William's shoulder, laughing so hard she could barely breathe. William, despite every effort to remain dignified, laughed, too. And that night, for the first time since Daniel's death, William stood in the backyard beneath string lights while Annie and Eli chased fireflies, and Rachel stood beside him, not as a guest, not as an obligation, not as his brother's memory, but as the woman he loved. Weeks later, on a quiet Sunday afternoon, William called Eli into the library. The boy entered suspiciously. Am I in trouble? William smiled faintly. No, that's usually what people say right before trouble. William gestured to the chair opposite his desk. Eli climbed into it. William sat across from him and folded his hands carefully. "There's something I want to ask you." Eli blinked. William took a breath. "If your mother and I ever decided to get married someday," he watched the boy carefully. "How would you feel about that?" Eli frowned in deep concentration, then asked, "Would you still be my uncle?" William smiled. "Always." "Would Annie still be my cousin?" "Yes." Eli thought harder, then asked the question that mattered most. "Would you still want me if you and Mommy had your own kids?" William's heart nearly stopped. He moved instantly around the desk and knelt before the boy. "Listen to me." His voice was low and fierce. "There is nothing that could ever make me want you less than I do right now." Eli searched his face, then whispered, "Promise." William took the child's small hand in his. "On my life." Eli stared at him for one long moment, then smiled. "Okay." He shrugged. "You can marry her." William laughed so hard he had to sit back on the floor. Later that evening, as the sun dipped gold over the estate, William found Rachel in the garden. He took her hand, and for once, the billionaire who could command rooms full of powerful men looked almost nervous. Rachel immediately noticed. "What happened?" William exhaled, then said the words that changed everything. "I spoke to Eli." Her eyes widened. "You did what?" He approved. Rachel stared. Then realization dawned, then shock, then tears. William reached into his pocket and dropped to one knee. Across the lawn, hidden badly behind a hedge, Annie and Eli immediately began whisper-screaming. Margaret, Mrs. Campbell, and half the staff pretended not to watch from the windows. William looked up at Rachel, his voice steady despite the emotion in it. "I lost too many years to pride. Too many people to silence. I won't waste another day pretending I know what the future holds." His eyes shone. "But I know this. I want to spend mine with you." He swallowed once. "Rachel Carter, will you marry me?" Rachel cried before he finished the sentence, then laughed through tears, then nodded wildly. "Yes." The children exploded from behind the hedge, screaming. William rose and kissed her as the whole household erupted in cheers. And as Rachel laughed against his lips while Annie and Eli ran circles around them, shouting about weddings and cake, William Whitmore understood one final truth. Sometimes the family you lose teaches you how to cherish the family you find. And sometimes love returns not to replace what was lost, but to finish what grief began healing. Wedding planning turned Whitmore Manor into a battlefield. No one had anticipated that the true force of nature in the Whitmore family would not be William, nor Rachel, nor even Annie in one of her moods. It would be Margaret Whitmore with a seating chart. For 3 straight weeks, the estate became headquarters for florists, caterers, tailor, planners, musicians, and enough clipboard-carrying professionals to resemble the launch of a small government operation. Margaret approached the event with the grim focus of a woman determined to make up for every stolen year of joy her family had lost. Rachel, to her credit, attempted to maintain perspective. "It's one day," she reminded everyone. Margaret responded, horrified. "It is your wedding day." Annie and Eli, meanwhile, treated the entire process as the greatest entertainment of their young lives. Annie appointed herself assistant bride manager. No one knew what that meant. She invented responsibilities hourly. Eli insisted his role as ring bearer should involve at least one sword, a request denied repeatedly by every adult involved. William spent most of the preparations moving between amusement and quiet disbelief. For years, Whitmore Manor had hosted galas, political dinners, fundraisers, and corporate events so polished they bordered on theatrical. Yet none of those ever felt as alive as this. Rachel laughing with seamstresses in the ballroom. Annie and Eli racing through halls carrying ribbons they had stolen from decorators. Margaret arguing passionately with a florist over the moral importance of proper roses. It was chaos, beautiful chaos, and beneath it all ran something deeper. Peace. One evening, a week before the wedding, William found Eli in the upstairs hallway standing before Daniel's portrait again. The boy did that often now. Sometimes for only a moment, sometimes longer. William approached quietly. "You talk to him sometimes, don't you?" Eli nodded without looking away, "Mostly in my head." William stood beside him. "What do you say?" Eli thought for a moment. I tell him stuff. He shrugged. Like when I get good grades or if Annie cheats at board games or when Grandma Margaret makes weird old people soup. William laughed softly. Then Eli asked without turning. Do you think he knows about the wedding? William looked up at his brother's painted face, then answered quietly. Yes, I think he knows. Eli considered that, then whispered, do you think he's okay with it? The question landed gently but deeply. William crouched beside him. I know he is. How? William looked at Daniel's portrait. Because if Daniel were here, he thought he would see Rachel smiling again. He would see his son healthy and loved. He would see the family that once failed him finally becoming worthy of his memory. And he would understand. Because your father loved you both too much to want you lonely forever, William said softly. Eli nodded as though accepting sacred truth, then reached up and touched the frame. Okay. The night before the wedding, Rachel could not sleep. William found her downstairs in the darkened conservatory, still in her robe, barefoot among the moonlit plants. She looked up as he entered. Traditionally, the groom isn't supposed to see the bride the night before. William crossed the room anyway. Traditionally, the bride also sleeps. Rachel smiled faintly, then looked away. He knew that expression. What is it? She hesitated, then said softly. I'm afraid. William stepped closer. Of what? Her eyes filled. That I'm too happy. The answer surprised him. Rachel gave a watery laugh. Every good thing in my life before this eventually got taken away. Her voice shook. Part of me keeps waiting for something terrible to happen because people like me don't get this much happiness without paying for it. William's face softened. He took both her hands. Rachel. She looked at him, his voice lowered, steady and certain. The bad things already happened. Tears spilled down her cheeks. William brushed one away with his thumb. You buried the man you loved. You raised a child alone. You survived fear, grief, poverty, and pain that would have broken most people. He pressed his forehead lightly to hers. If there is any justice in this world at all, then what comes next is not punishment. Her breath caught, it's peace. Rachel broke into tears and kissed him before he could say anything more. The wedding took place beneath the summer sun in the gardens behind Whitmore Manor. White chairs lined the lawn. String quartets played beneath flowering arches. Chicago's most powerful names attended beside hospital nurses. Rachel's old co-workers, neighborhood friends from the South Side, and anyone else who mattered to the people at the center of the day. Because Rachel had insisted on one thing, no more dividing the world into who belonged and who didn't. The guest list reflected that. Margaret cried before the ceremony even began. Mrs. Campbell cried harder. Frank Donovan denied crying despite clear evidence to the contrary. Annie walked down the aisle, scattering flower petals with the dramatic seriousness of someone convinced the entire event rested on her shoulders. Eli followed, carrying the rings with such concentration, one would think he was transporting nuclear launch codes. Then Rachel appeared, and William forgot how to breathe. She walked toward him beneath the summer light, radiant and trembling and smiling through tears. And for one impossible moment, he felt the full weight of every road that had led them here. Loss, regret, grief, shishmi, love. When she reached him, Annie whispered loudly from the front row. Daddy looks like he might cry. Eli whispered back, he is crying. William ignored both of them barely. The vows were simple, honest. Rachel's voice shook when she promised to choose him every day. William's nearly failed entirely when he vowed to protect her and the children for the rest of his life. Then the officiant smiled and said the words that sealed everything. You may kiss your bride. The children cheered before the adults did. The reception lasted deep into the night. Music drifted across the gardens. Guests danced beneath lights strung through the trees. Margaret held Eli in her lap during slow songs and cried openly when he called her grandma without thinking. Annie informed anyone who would listen that she had basically planned the whole thing. Rachel danced with William under the stars while Eli fell asleep in a chair beside the cake table with frosting on his cheek. Late that night, after most guests had gone, and the children were asleep upstairs in a tangle of formal clothes and exhaustion, William slipped away from the reception for a moment of quiet. He found himself standing in the upstairs hallway before Daniel's portrait. He looked at it for a long time, then said softly into the empty corridor, "I hope we did right by them." Silence answered, but not empty silence. Peaceful silence, the kind that comes when a man finally lays down an old burden. William touched the frame once, then turned to go, only to find Eli standing barefoot in the hallway behind him, half asleep and clutching his pillow. "You okay?" William whispered. Eli nodded sleepily, then asked, "Can I call you Dad now?" William froze. Every sound in the world seemed to vanish. He crouched slowly to eye level. "Only if you want to." Eli stared at him with complete sincerity. "I want to." William's composure shattered. He pulled the boy into his arms and held him tight. "Then yes," he whispered hoarsely. "Yes, you can." Eli yawned against his shoulder. "Okay, Dad." And as William carried his son back to bed through the quiet halls of the house that had once been full of ghosts, he understood that some prayers arrive disguised as heartbreak. And some miracles begin with a child brave enough to ask a question no one expects. "Daddy, why does that boy have the same birthmark as me?" The morning after the wedding dawned quiet and golden. For the first time in weeks, Whitmore Manor rested. The caterers were gone. The musicians had packed their instruments. The flower arrangements drooped slightly in the summer heat. Remnants of joy scattered across the estate like proof the celebration had truly happened. The house, so recently full of music and laughter and movement, now breathed in the peaceful hush that follows great happiness. William woke before anyone else. Old habits died hard, but this morning for once he did not rise immediately. He lay still in bed, sunlight spilling across the sheets. Rachel asleep beside him with one hand resting lightly over his chest as if even in sleep she needed to know he was there. His wife, the words still felt unreal. For several quiet minutes he simply watched her. Then footsteps thundered down the hallway. William closed his eyes. Rachel groaned into the pillow. "Please tell me that's not them." A split second later, the bedroom door burst open. "Good morning," Annie shouted. Eli followed behind her, still in wrinkled pajamas, hair wild from sleep. "We're hungry." Rachel buried her face in the blanket. William laughed. And just like that, their first morning as husband and wife began not with elegance or romance, but with two children cannonballing into the bed and demanding pancakes. It was perfect. Breakfast became an event. Margaret cried again when Eli accidentally referred to Rachel as Mrs. Whitmore and then corrected himself by announcing loudly that Mom says she's still Rachel, even if her name got fancier. Annie insisted the wedding cake should count as breakfast because celebration calories don't count. Mrs. Campbell threatened retirement twice before 9 a.m. And through all of it, William found himself pausing over and over just to take it in. Rachel laughing at the kitchen island. Eli perched beside him in oversized pajamas. Annie bossing everyone with the confidence of a small empress. Margaret smiling into her coffee with the softened expression of a woman finally at peace. This was what had been stolen from Daniel. And this was what William had sworn to restore. Later that afternoon, after the house quieted and the children disappeared into the backyard to wage some elaborate game involving pirate treasure and water balloons, William made his way alone to the family cemetery at the edge of the estate. The Whitmores had been buried there for generations beneath old stone and careful landscaping. Daniel's memorial marker stood near the back beneath an oak tree. William stopped in front of it and stood in silence. For a long while, he said nothing. Then finally, "Well," he murmured, hands in his pockets. "You missed one hell of a wedding." Wind moved softly through the trees. He looked down at the stone. "I married her." His voice caught slightly. Eli asked if he could call me Dad. A long silence followed. William swallowed. "I don't know if I deserve any of this." The confession disappeared into the summer air. Then he gave the smallest shake of his head. "But I'll spend the rest of my life trying to." He rested one hand briefly on the cool stone. "I loved you badly when you were alive, brother." Proudly, stubbornly in all the ways that matter least when time runs out. His voice roughened. So I'm trying to love what you left behind better than I loved you." His eyes filled. "I hope that counts for something." Behind him came the sound of footsteps. William turned. Rachel stood several yards away with Eli and Annie beside her. No one spoke. Then Eli ran forward first. He stopped in front of Daniel's grave, looking down at the marker. "Hi, Daddy," he said softly. Rachel covered her mouth. William looked away briefly. Eli knelt and placed a small plastic dinosaur at the base of the stone. "It's my coolest one," he informed the grave. "Seriously, I think you'd like it," Annie added. "He picked the green one because apparently that's respectful." "It is respectful," Eli whispered. Rachel knelt beside him and brushed tears from her face. Then the four of them stood together there in the summer sunlight, past and present meeting in the quiet. No more secrets, no more missing years, no more lies, only truth, only love. That autumn, William legally adopted Eli. The courtroom was private by request. No press, no fam, just family. The judge, an older woman with kind eyes and a sharp sense of humor, reviewed the paperwork before smiling over her glasses. "Well," she said, "this may be the happiest adoption hearing I've had all year." Eli sat in a tiny suit, swinging his legs beneath the bench. The judge looked at him. "Young man, do you understand what adoption means?" Eli nodded proudly. "It means he picks me forever." The courtroom went silent. Rachel immediately cried. Margaret openly sobbed. Even the judge blinked rapidly before clearing her throat. "Yes," she said softly. "That's exactly what it means." Then she signed the order. And just like that, Elijah Carter Whitmore became Elijah Whitmore. When they stepped outside the courthouse, Annie tackled him in celebration. "You're officially stuck with us now." Eli grinned. "Good." Years later, people in Chicago would tell many stories about William Whitmore. They would talk about the billionaire who rebuilt half the Southside pediatric wing after his nephew's surgery. They would talk about the scholarships he funded in Daniel's name for children from struggling neighborhoods. They would talk about the quiet donations, the policy changes, the way Whitmore Holdings began valuing people over appearances after he took full control. They would call him generous, visionary, changed. But the people who knew him best knew the truth. William Whitmore had not become a better man because of wealth. He became a better man because a little girl once tugged his sleeve in a crowded hospital and asked him to look. On winter nights, years later, when the children were older, and the house glowed warm against the snow, William would sometimes stand in the upstairs hallway listening to the sound of life inside Whitmore Manor. Annie practicing piano badly, Eli arguing with tutors, Rachel laughing downstairs, the clatter of dishes, the ordinary music of family. And every time, without fail, he would think the same thing. A man can spend half his life building an empire and still not understand what wealth is. Then one day, a child calls him dad, and suddenly he knows. Because in the end, the greatest inheritance William Whitmore ever claimed was not his father's fortune. It was the family he nearly lost before he learned how to love them. And beneath the roof of the house once ruled by pride and silence, a different legacy finally took root. Not power, not status, not fear, but this: that blood may make people relatives. Yet love is what makes them family. This story reminds us that true family is not built by wealth, status, or blood alone. It is built by love, loyalty, and the courage to choose one another when it matters most. It teaches that pride and silence can destroy lives, while compassion and truth can heal wounds once thought permanent. Sometimes the people we fail in the past cannot be brought back. But we can still honor them by loving those they left behind. In the end, justice is not only about exposing wrongs. It is about making things right while there is still time. Most of all, the story shows that the greatest legacy a person can leave is not money or power, but the love they inspire in the family they build. This video is a work of fiction created with the assistance of artificial intelligence. All characters, events, and situations are not real and do not represent any actual people or true stories. The content is intended for storytelling and emotional illustration,